Today on Musicians Edition, we're going to talk about drags and ruffs, okay? So if you haven't seen our notation video for drags and ruffs, you might check those out. Also, if you haven't seen the flam video, a lot of the stuff we do in this video is going to be built upon that, okay? So make sure you go and check out the flam video as well. That'll give you a little more of a foundation upon which we can build our drags and our ruffs, okay? So like we've talked about before, drags and ruffs, as our flams, are just adding things to the primary note, okay? So when we played flams, right, we started down low with one hand, up high with the other hand, playing both at the same time, so that the little note happens right before the big note, okay? So now when we play a drag, we're gonna start in the same position, but instead of playing one note with the little note, we're going to play two, right? Okay, now if you're not comfortable with double strokes, you can always start with a buzz in place of that double stroke, okay? So instead of this with the little note, you get this with the little note. Okay, so something like this. Okay, so you're starting both of those, you're moving your hands at the exact same time, and you're just playing a buzz with this hand, right? Or a double stroke with this hand, depending on what you're comfortable with, right? Both are useful. Both are, more and less comfortable for different people. So it's always good to experiment around and see what you like, right? So the same way that we talked about flams being open and closed, right? Or more spread out or more squeezed together, we can do the same thing with drags, okay? So we can play them very spread out, right? Which would be kind of a big wide open double stroke. Right, where it almost turns into a rhythm, ta-ta-ta, right? And a one, it almost turns into that, right? Okay, then we can play the tightest version, which is a really squeezed buzz, right? Right, so we can refer to this as open, right, or nice and wide. Right, and we can refer to this as closed or very tight. Okay, and then, ultimately we want to practice everything in between, kind of like we did with the flams, right? We want to practice the extreme open, extreme closed, and then kind of finding in between and be able to control it all the way through that. Because all of those different variations are useful in different contexts, okay? So here's very wide, here's very closed, and here's in between. Okay, we can try the same thing on the left hand, right? Very wide, closed, and in the middle. Okay, and the goal of that exercise is to play 4 in a row of each one, and each of those 4 sounds exactly the same, right? Really listen closely, see if you can catch any little inconsistencies, right? And just use your ears and make them as much the exact same 4 times in a row as you can, okay? And then you'll probably notice that one hand is more comfortable than the other hand, right? So you want to give a little extra time to the hand that's less comfortable. For me, the left hand is a little bit, isn't quite as comfortable as my right-handed drags, right? So I'm going to practice this one a little bit more, okay? Okay, so the exercise is 4 wide, 4 closed, and 4 in the middle. Listening really closely all the time, and then switch hands. 4 nice and wide. Okay, 4 really closed. Listening carefully, trying to work out any variation in there, right? And then in the middle. Okay, so you can see when I'm doing this, I'm playing my grace note with one hand, and then the other hand is playing full strokes, right? Or we want to be playing full strokes, right? And the reason is we want to be ready to play the next one, right? If I leave it down, then I have to lift and play it again, lift, play it again, right? So just let it bounce and be ready for the next one, okay? Now, if we wanted to play a drag on one hand and then switch to the other hand, then we do the opposite applies, right? So instead of letting it bounce, we're gonna leave it down. And we covered this in a little more depth in the flam video, right? But the idea is that you want to leave the primary note down and then lift the grace note. And that puts you in position to play a drag on the other hand, right? Or a flam on the other hand, okay? So if I were to play a right-handed drag, I'm prepped for a left-handed drag, right? Left-handed drag, I'm gonna play the grace note and then lift and leave the primary note down, right? And then I can go back and forth, leaving the primary note down, lifting the grace note to put myself in position to play the next one. Right, and this is a really good exercise to go back and forth to check for consistency between your hands, right? A lot of times you'll hear either your right-handed drags are more closed than your left-handed drags or vice versa, right? And so you can really work on listening to each of those and try to get both hands to sound the same, right? It's very difficult to get them exactly the same, okay? So lots that can be worked on there, okay? So we've got consecutive drags, right, on one hand, playing open, closed, and in between, right? We've got alternating drags, trying to get the hands to sound the same, right? Lifting the grace note, leaving the primary note down. And then you can practice that same exercise open, right? Back and forth with a very open drag. And then you can practice it closed. And then you can practice it in between. Okay? And you can obsess for hours over getting all those little grace notes to sound exactly the same, right? And it's a really good exercise to then alternate with some flams as well, right? So if you could play some flams alternating, and then drags, right? And you can kind of go in and out of drags and flams, right? And get yourself used to kind of switching from one to the other. The motion in the hands is the same. What you're going to notice is different is just a little bit of manipulating the back fingers to get either a single note or a buzz note or an open note, right? So that's how we control that, all right? Okay, so then moving on to ruffs, right? Like we said in the notation video, sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. For our purposes, we're just going to say drags are the two-note grace notes that are written in the notation. We're going to call ruffs 3 notes that are written in 3 grace notes before the primary note written in the notation, okay? So like we talked about in that video, there's a couple ways to execute it, right? One way is to play all 3 notes and then a primary note, right? So we want to keep those notes down nice and low. We'll play 1, 2, 3, and then a big note, right? Right, and you can kind of hear I have it really spread out right now because I'm trying to play it slowly. I'm getting ta-ka-ta-ta. Right, we can do the same thing the other way, right? So a left-handed ruff, which is going to give us, which is going to be 3 grace notes starting on the right hand, and then the left hand plays the primary note. Right? And what you can do is start with those spread out like that. Play 4 on the right hand, 4 on the left hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then switch hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then try to squeeze them a little bit closer together. Start the whole thing over, but with tighter grace notes. Right, and then switch hands. Right, and then switch back. Try to squeeze the grace notes closer again. And then switch. Switch again. Leaving tighter. Switch again. Right? And you can kind of just keep progressing with that and see how close you can get the grace notes to go to the primary note, keeping it nice and consistent, right? So start out wide, then each time you alternate, try to squeeze them a little bit closer together, a little bit closer together, a little bit closer together, okay? Now the other sticking we talked about in the notation video is the first grace note on one hand and then the second 2 on the other hand as a double stroke, right? This transfers really well from the drags we just worked on, right? So this would stay the same, right? And we would just add one note with the same hand that's going to play the primary note, okay? Right, so the drag would be this, the ruff would be this, okay? So you can see the same thing is happening in my left hand for a right-handed ruff, right? So this or versus this, right? Left hand stays the same. And you can do the same thing where you just slowly progress and squeeze the grace notes closer and closer together. Okay? Do the same thing on the left hand, right? So 2 open grace notes with the right hand, primary note with the left, right? And then 1 grace note with the left, 2 grace notes with the right, primary note with the left. So 2 grace notes with the right for the drag, and then the ruff adds 1 left. Okay, you can hear my left hand is a lot less comfortable than my right hand. Yeah, so you'll hear those little inconsistencies, and that's just stuff you can practice, right? And just listen really, really closely, and just keep working for consistency, right? These take a long time to develop, right? So give them some time every time you practice. Do these exercises for a couple minutes as part of your warm up routine, and then over the course of weeks, months, years, they start to refine and they start to sound really good, and you get good at controlling them, right? Work on your drags, two grace notes with one hand, right? Work on them consecutively, working tighter or starting open and then closed and then in the middle, right? And work on alternating drags, right? Doing the same thing, playing them very open, very closed in the middle, right? And then mess around with the stickings that you like for the ruffs, right? Whether it's singled or one hand and then 2 of the other hand, okay? All right, well, happy practicing, and I'll see you next time.